Thank you for joining us this evening for the Artists Exchange, a group created by and for artists to share new work, ideas, resources, and opportunities monthly over a glass of wine or tea as you prefer. So grab your beverage and join us as we discover the work of two Bay Area artists, Nimisha Doongarwal and Reiko Fujii. I am Shelley Rugg, the Executive Director at Gallery Route 1 and the co-producer of Artists Exchange. For our presentation tonight, we ask that you please stay muted unless we ask you to unmute. For best viewing, select speaker view from the top right corner of the Zoom viewing screen. And we want you to know that we are recording today's presentation for future viewing on our website and YouTube channel. Now, please join me in welcoming our host and co-producer, Pamela Blotner, an East Bay artist whose sculpture and drawings reflect on our relationship to wildlife and environmental destruction. She has taught at several universities, including the University of San Francisco and the San Francisco Art Institute, and at Pixar Animation Studios. In 2017, she was appointed a U.S. Arts Envoy to Burma. Welcome, Pamela.
Thank you, Shelley. That was lovely. Okay, our guests tonight, as Shelley said, are Nimisha Doongarwal and Reiko Fujii, both of whom create art that explores the effects that heritage and exodus have on both group and individual identity. Let's start with Nimisha. And I will tell you a little bit about her, and then she will tell you the rest. Nimisha Doongarwal looks at immigration and cultural identity through a rich collage of diverse materials and using varied techniques. Having grown up in India, she explores the cultural imprinting that the British left on her country, as well as her journey to an immigrant life in the United States. Her post-colonial portrait series combines paint, old photographs, old fabric, or I should say vintage fabric, and digital prints to explore the relationships between past and popular culture, touching on societal issues such as racism, immigration, and gender inequality. Her goal is to give a voice to women and people of color who face constant challenges in their societies. Okay, welcome, Nimisha. You ready to go?
Yeah, I am. Thank you for giving me a good introduction. That was very kind of you. Shelley, do you want to share the screen? Hey, everyone. Cool. Thank you. Thanks, Shelley. Thanks, Pamela. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm really honored to be here and sharing my art alongside all of you. I know a lot of you are amazing artists in the area, and I'm really grateful. As Pamela mentioned, I am an immigrant from India, and I create mixed media art. But just a quick recap on my story. So I grew up with a mom, artist mom, and I always painted and drew while copying her own paintings, and that's how I learned my painting. But I actually ended up becoming an engineer as a profession. But around in 2014, I kind of was rediscovering my own passion, my own identity living here in United States. And at that point, I wanted to learn a little bit more about art history, art psychology. And that is when I actually started to enroll into a more traditional learning form of art, and I enrolled into Academy of Arts for my master's. That's pretty much when my art journey started, and I kind of rediscovered my whole passion about art at that point. My works mostly are very inspired by my own surroundings, and it is to find my own identity as a global citizen living here. And I very much think about my art as an expression, and I consider it as a visual documentary of events in past and in my own present. Next slide, please. Cool. So before I start talking about my work, I do want to ask you all a quick question. When I ask you, who are you? Um, what is going to be a response? Do you come back with a photo of yourself and show it on to someone who asked you that question, or do you just bring your face and show it to you? I don't think any of us do that. We all talk about our present, our future, and what we want to do, and what we are when we're talking about ourselves. We're not showing our faces. So do we need to do that when we are looking at portraits? Probably no. So around 2018, 2017, like in Trump's administration, I was struggling with my own identity, my own belonging. And that time I kind of wanted to use my art form in order to show what portrait or what identity mean to people, because there was a lot of question about race, color, just us, our physical appearances to show our identities. And that is something I did not agree with. I felt like it is our story, it's our past, our present, and our future, which tells our portrait, not our faces. And that was kind of the start of my identity series. Next slide, please. So this painting is called Hybrid Identity. It is a collage, oil painting, acrylic, and fabric. I did start my identity series by actually painting portraits, and these portraits are overlaying Indian and Eastern heritage onto Western in order to showcase when the colonization happened. That's when the globalization happened, and that is when we started to kind of come together as these global identities. A lot of times we have also always seen kind of superimposition of Western society onto Eastern society, be it any colonized nations like India, where I'm from, but it belongs to China or Asia, Africa, anywhere else. So you would always see those, but I wanted to show the whole different story. I wanted to show how the superimposition and the cultural overlap would look like on a British woman. So this is actually Donna Taylor from 1900s, and I wanted to paint her with Indian cultural colors, patterns. I'm using fabric here. I'm also using a lot of laces and a very peculiar way of creating textile, which called stamping. So I'm using stamps here in order to add that heritage and culture back to my portraits. But these are not Indian women. These are very much Western women, but this is how I would look like, how people in West got transformed, like the people in East got transformed. So yeah, I'm using a lot of these cultural stamps in order to kind of reinforce that heritage onto the Western cultures. One more thing, if you notice in the image, I use a stamp which is called bindi on the forehead, which is a very peculiar thing in Indian culture. And I wanted to show that in some form in all the portraits I do. So that is a very common theme on every portrait I do. Next slide, please. So this is another painting or collage I did. It is called Immigrant Identity. One of the things I kind of felt for years as an artist was I wanted to paint. That was the only medium I could use in order to show my expression. But while I was discovering this whole identity series, I kind of felt we all were collages. We all were these overlaps of our cultures, our ancestral cultures, are the people around us, and that is what made us, that is what made our identity. And I just wanted to use that in my own work. So in my art practice, I kind of moved away from painting and wanted to see how the collaging and superimposing of actual photographs would look like. So in this image, I'm using about 100 to 200 images. Mostly they are vintage images from 1900s colonial time, both from Britain and from India. And I wanted to create the silhouette of a woman. In this case, it's an Indian woman, but I've used both British and Indian men and women, and use these images which involved food, textile, patterns, actual people from both countries, and wanted to see how that would come together. But I'm also using my own images I took, which kind of reminds me of that overlap in my own life, and bring that back to these images. So that is kind of a final image. I also used if you can see around her neck, there is a sari. So that is actual vintage sari. That is actually my grandmom's sari I'm using here. But I use a lot of those vintage fabric in order to add those layers, make it more dimensional, but also to kind of bring that heritage back to these portraits. I'm also using text in a lot of places. They can be newspaper cuttings from olden times or magazine cuttings. Next slide, please. Cool. So the last image I talked about was collage. This image is called Who Am I? And around when I was creating this painting, I was also learning printmaking. One of the things I loved about printmaking was we have one image, and when you photo transfer it, you'd get a similar image, but you would never actually ever get the exact image. When I see us like as global citizens, what I see is like, I am an Indian, but there are a lot of Indians, and we cannot categorize one person as like Indian, Chinese, American. No, right? Like we are all very unique. And that was very fascinating when I thought about it in terms of image transfer. I kind of felt I was recreating that when I was taking an image, I photo transfer it. It just has its own uniqueness. There were some pieces which were there, some pieces would come out differently. And that was exactly how I would see us. Same, but not exactly, right? Like very unique in our own terms. And in order to, again, use that idea and use that idea in order to incorporate it in my own paintings, I started using printmaking. So this image, instead of collage, what I did was I started creating digital images first, and then I photo transferred that digital image back to the canvas in order to get the first layer. And then I started the collage on it. So that was like, I am a unique layer, but then I'm adding all these unique collages on top of it. So that added more layers on my painting, but also kind of recombined with the concept of the identity and the overlap with the identity. If you see this image, you see a lot of images are, again, I mentioned 1900s, colonial time. There is an image of a woman, which is an Indian image, kind of like a worker with something on her head. And then just in front of her, there's an image of a British woman, a monarch with like her gown and stuff. So those kind of overlaps kind of show the contrasting world around that time. And next slide, please. Can you play the slide? Thank you. Cool. While it's playing, I want to show like how I create these digital images. So while you're seeing how it's created, this makes the first layer of photo transfer, what I was mentioning earlier. But these are about kind of like in total, again, 50 to 100 images. But all these images are cut pieces of people and textile patterns. But the reason I actually use broken pieces is because I don't want a face in front of anybody. I want us to visualize them as people. I want it as a puzzle, which in your head, you can create a person, because when we look at people, we are creating our own people. We're not really looking at someone as who they are right by their face. And that's exactly why I use this. And the other thing why I'm using colonial era photographs and vintage images from 1900s is I strongly believe that's when the global society started to become. That's when a lot of immigration happened. Britishers and the other colonial people, they actually started sending people out. And that's when the immigration started. It is not our society now, it was then. And that is why I wanted to tell a story from that lens and not the current immigration, and show why race mix is important, because it started then and it is a beautiful thing. It created our culture the way it is today, with a lot of influences from all around the world. Next slide, please. Oh, can you go to the next? Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, cool. So so this is a photo transfer process. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually printing my images onto paper and using Mod Podge to actually photo transfer on wood panel. I've used wood panels as well as canvases. I prefer wood panels just because of the sturdy surface. I've also tried multiple mediums, but I like Mod Podge the best in order to do that. This is by far the most or the lengthiest process. It takes a lot of time and lot of patience to create that image as it is, and get it transferred onto the wood panel. Next slide, please. Okay, cool. So the image I was showing in the earlier previous slide, where I was showing how I was creating digitally, this is the finished piece. It is called Who Am I? And it is 36 by 36 piece on a wood panel. If you see here, there is a lot of painting I do. So the whole background is all painted. These are very many like patterns from the fabric, but I tend to paint a lot of these. And then you also see a lot of mark making. So the way I make marks in my paintings are a lot of these are tears, and they are to represent that there were a lot of unfortunate things, a lot of resistance while this globalization and overlap was happening. So I want to use those in order to represent the bad parts of all of this overlap. Also, this final image actually is 7 to 10 layers. So if you see it in person, you can actually see the difference between first layer to last layer. Mostly I finish up my paintings with oil paint in the last layer. And a lot of times they are combined with the actual fabric, and the fabric would come out of saris or old fabric, old like actual traditional clothing I would carry, or my grandmom or my mom would have. And I resource them actually back from India just to have that heritage and like authenticity back into the painting. So yeah, basically I just wanted to show some more slides, but that's pretty much it. So I kind of just use collaging and make mark makings with all my tiers and stuff and layer it on top of each other. So that's kind of my whole process in order to create painting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nimisha. That was very interesting. I learned a lot more about your history this time around, so thank you. Now we're going to switch over and look at and listen to Reiko Fujii. She's a Japanese American artist, and she makes uniquely expressive art that draws on her heritage and her family's experience in American internment camps in California during World War II. And also her parents' memories of growing up, her father growing up in Isumi, Japan, and her mother growing up, I believe, on a chicken farm in Riverside, California. Reiko is determined to preserve stories, the stories of her ancestors and the stories of the Japanese American experience, as well as tales of the extraordinary residing in the mundane. Her installations, books, and videos, which include family artifacts and art objects, depict family lore, reframed within the context of American history. Welcome, Reiko.
Thank you. So great to see so many familiar faces out there. Thank you for joining in tonight. Okay, so I'll ask for the first slide, please. Okay, this photo is called Sunrise in a Dewdrop, and it's one of my favorites. It reminds me of William Blake's poem about seeing a world in a grain of sand. So I am an interdisciplinary mixed media artist, and I'll use any materials that express what is on my mind or in my heart. I learned how to work with specific materials in order to creatively communicate a story about myself, other people, nature, or a cause I support. I'm most fulfilled when I combine my kiln form glass, photography, videography, performance, and/or installation. My most recent work is leveraging these techniques to highlight the unjust imprisonment of over 125,000 Japanese people of Japanese descent during World War II. In order for me to explain my art, where my art originates, I need to start from the beginning of my life. Next slide. I was born in 1950, 4 years after my mother and her family were released from being imprisoned in the desert in American concentration camps. The day after I was born, my mother had a mental breakdown, a major mental breakdown. And she forgot that she had me. She forgot she had a baby. She never fully recovered, but in time she accepted me as her own. Later, she was the one who inspired me to be creative. When my brothers and I were young, she used to make life-size dolls out of newspaper for us. Still, her dysfunction and my father's autocratic rule contributed to my feelings of insecurity, depression, and fear. Next slide. This piece is called Reflection. So on the outside of the box, that is a picture of me, and my mother looks like she's floating, and she doesn't have a face. So next slide, Pete, please. On the inside of the box there's a fragile glass face, and that is of my face. And I'm wondering how much of my mother's disposition I inherited. That's something that kind of I thought about all my life. So I think this is one of my most kind of important pieces that I've done. Next slide. And in 1996, when I was 46 years old, I decided to go back to school to avoid the empty nest syndrome. My two children were teenagers and they were reaching the age of independence. So I enrolled in John F. Kennedy University and Ohlone College and to earn my Master's of Fine Arts degree in studio arts. After several years of seeing therapists, during one of my sessions, I discovered that creating art around my angst helped me the most. So with the support of my instructors and students at both John F. Kennedy and Ohlone College, I felt secure enough to stop going to therapy. This series of glass sculptures represents my emergence from my depths of depression. Next slide. For 3 years, I studied kiln form glass and metal sculpture at Ohlone College in Fremont and video editing for a year at Diablo Valley College. In 2002, I made my first wearable glass ancestral kimono. With this kimono had images of my ancestors adhered to 224 frames made up of over 1,800 pieces of hand-cut and fused glass. The kimono took me on a journey to the towns of where my ancestors lived in Japan, Manzanar, and Riverside. This photo is when I visited Asumi, Japan, where my father's family lived and are still buried. I designed the kimono to make the sound of wind chimes when the glass squares strike against one another. A month after I made the first kimono, I found out that in Japan at the Obon Festival, the ancestors are called back, often by using the sound of wind chimes. Next slide. In 2004, my beloved grandparents' farm in Riverside was sold to developers and was slated to be demolished. So the relatives were all invited to go to the farm and take home whatever they wanted. I took trunks of old clothes that were worn by my aunts and uncles while they were incarcerated. I also cut out 10 feet of the barn wall, and I took the egg house door. Next slide. I have included the door, the wall and the door in my performances about growing up on the Inaba farm. In this performance, I start out as a young girl, and I transform into my grandmother. Next slide. I include the egg house door in my installations, telling the story of the farm and my mother's side of the family. Next slide. This library catalog card cabinet is filled with about 700 altered cards. In this installation, which I call Curating Joy, I included some of my nature photographs on the wall and a video documentary I created called Suburban Wildlife. Next slide. I really loved the words on this card, and I often think about the beauty I see, especially when I photograph faces, animals, the sunset, the moonrise, and anything in nature. Next slide. This one is a small installation I made on a light box, and I called it The Ancestors' Shoes. And I was working on this piece when my dad suddenly died. The following words came to my mind after I found his gardening shoes in his outside closet. Ancestors walk on light, leaving their shoes behind. Next slide. And to honor my mother and her ancestors, my daughter, Melissa, and I wore our ancestral kimonos at my mother's memorial in Half Moon Bay in 2018. See, my mother and father loved to drive to the beach to watch the birds in the waves. That's why we had her memorial at the beach. Next slide, please. In 2010, I had become more curious about the different stories people had about their experiences during their World War II incarceration. I recorded the memories of former incarcerees, which included relatives and acquaintances. My 23-minute Detained Alien Enemy documentary is available to watch on YouTube. Next slide. I was intrigued by the photographs that I had collected from the interviewees, and I decided to make a kimono with those photographs. But instead of being adhered to the glass, the photos are fused to the glass. I finally figured out how to fuse the photos to the glass. Next slide, please. So 5 Japanese American third generation women artists, Sherry Arai DeBoer, Ellen Beck, Kathy Fujioka, Naomi Judy Shintani, and I decided that we would go to the 2018 Manzanar pilgrimage to honor our ancestors and others who were unjustly incarcerated during World War II. Next slide. Because we had video footage of our journey taken by our support person, Pat Mayo, we were inspired to make a documentary about our experience. It is called Sansei Granddaughter's Journey and is available on Vimeo. Next slide. The last July, the 5 of us Sansei granddaughters exhibited our documentary and artwork related to the incarceration of Japanese Americans in San Bruno, California, at the AZ Gallery, located on the land of the former Tanforan Detention Center. This exhibit, workshops, and presentations educated the public about the history of the incarceration, highlighting the Tanforan history. We emphasize the importance of learning from our country's past history of racial injustices to promote a more equitable society. So here I am with my granddaughter, Gianna, and in my detained alien kimono #2, and on the wall is my daughter Melissa, and she's wearing detained alien enemy kimono #1, and on the wall is They Might Be Spies, which is also behind me in person. So that's the last exhibit that I was in. So anyways, thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you so much, Reiko.
Thank you, Reiko. That was wonderful.
That was
and
amazing, very powerful.
Oh, thank you.
I was going to say, Pamela, I think we could give a few minutes to our artist and then open up the floor to the audience.
good. Normally we give the artist about 10 minutes, but I think we have so many people supporting them. I agree. Anything you'd like to ask each other?
I want to add, sorry, go ahead, Reiko.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add a comment. I am very intrigued by those kimonos, especially the stories they tell, like the second detained one. Like how many people did you actually interview, and were every image on those kimonos, like I think the detained too, were the story of every detained person? Like just want to know a little bit more. I was very intrigued by that particular kimono. Pretty interesting.
The first detained alien enemy kimono had photographs of my family, acquaintances, the people who I interviewed. I mean, because there's 224 squares that I wanted to cover, and actually some of them were on there several times. And kimono, the detained alien enemy kimono #2, which I finished for that show that we had last year. That had, I went out into the Japanese American community and I asked if anybody had photographs of their relatives or themselves while they were in the camps. Because all those photographs on the kimonos, they were not taken from the internet. They were given to me to use by personal people.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm interested, since you came over from India, did you come here to live, or did you know you were going to live here?
Yeah, so I actually literally just came for a few years. I wanted to do higher education in science. I am an engineer, so I came for that, but I stayed for work here, and then I just kind of in the process re-explored my interest in art. So I had no interest in staying here or ever becoming an artist, because I actually ended up becoming an engineer, but I've been living here 16 years now. So I call it more my home than in India, because my adult life has all been here.
So do you, I mean, your art is incredible. And I believe it's partly because you're young, that you know how to use the programs that are on the computer and online. And I just think it's amazing how you can take all these hundreds and 100 or 200 images and figure out how to place those. And I mean, I'm just enthralled by that. So I'm glad I got to listen to you talk about that.
I'm going to be rude and jump in now, because I think we would like to hear some things from our audience. If any of you have a question for either artist.
And you can go ahead and unmute yourself and just ask your question or make your comment. Well, I for one, I'm really looking forward to Nimisha's exhibition that's coming up real soon at Gallery Route 1. It's going to be opening March 25th. And so you'll get to see these works in person if you come out to the gallery. Did we have anybody with a question?
There's no question, but I'm very happy that I'm here. And I wanted to learn about Nimisha's work because I came across recently on Instagram and I was really curious. And Nimisha, you're doing great work, very interesting. And of
Thank you.
course, I respect Reiko and I follow her since a long time. And she does great work. So I think it was a beautiful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sama.
I'm going to play teacher and ask a question of Naomi, because I know you did a series of kimonos. They were the first group of pieces that I saw of yours, and they were very, of course, I thought that they were a very different idea. But do you share some ideas around the kimonos?
Well, my kimonos are I mean, textually they're fabric and do not have images on them as Reiko's beautiful kimonos do. But I think that probably what we do share is just the garment, the symbolism of the kimono, which is a very important symbol in Japan and also a symbol of women in Japan. So I think in that way, we share the symbolism of the honoring of how we depict our culture, and also maybe the little bit of difference between our culture and those that are in Japan, as far as being sansei and living in the US for 3 generations. So it's almost like we're recreating, transforming our culture a bit by our own experiences here.
They're well put.
When I wore the kimono in Japan, well, first of all, when Ron Moore had suggested that I do go to Japan, I thought he was nuts. And then I went there, and I was wondering how the Japanese people would perceive my doing that to make a kimono like that. And I asked my aunt, and my aunt was so supportive, and she said, you're gonna run into people who aren't gonna like it or understand it. But she said, just you need to do what's in your heart and what's important to you. And because I feel like I am honoring my ancestors, and I was also invited to wear it at the cemetery where my father's families are buried, and I was invited by the Buddhist priest to wear it there. So I felt like it was he was honored to have the kimono there. So yeah, it's the kimono is a symbol that is really important in the Japanese culture. So I want to be careful how I handle that.
Reiko, there's a question in the chat from Terry Wong, who's asking, are you still experimenting with echo printing?
Yes, I am. That's one of my main materials. Like right now, it's it's so fun, and it's you know, for anything. I mean, you could do any little simple thing and you can make it as complicated as you want. And so I've been doing it for like, oh, maybe 8 months now, maybe a year, but there's still so much I want to do, to experiment, to learn about it. So yeah, I am still experimenting with that. I love it too.
All right, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Oh, I see carbon stove.
Karina, she doesn't often go by Carbon.
Hey, yeah, it's sort of my private name. I'm Karina. I'm Pamela's sister-in-law. Having lived overseas, I have experienced a lot of cultural differences. Like, I don't understand in Japan how you're supposed to behave, or other places. So I wondered if any of you had comments about, you talked about it a little bit just now, about how your art is received in your country. Is it accepted? Is it acknowledged? Or is it, not liked? I'd just like to hear a little bit more about that. You talked a little bit about it already, but yeah.
Well, it's not my country. The United States is my country. Is my ancestors. Yeah, my ancestors' country. And some people looked at it as a kind of an anomaly. Well, it was an anomaly, but I wore it on we woke up at dawn, and we walked out. I walked out onto the breakwater where my father was when he was little, when he was not that little. He was 12 to 18. He lived in Japan. I walked out on that breakwater, and you could hear the tinkling of the glass because it's pretty loud. And then later that day, we went to like a kind of a 7-Eleven type of a store at a gas station. And one of the people who was working at the gas station, I didn't speak English, but it was translated to me. And he was saying, are you the one who was wearing that, thing out in this morning? And I said, yes. And he just seemed like really kind of puzzled by it, interested in it. So I think my aunt or my cousin who was with me kind of tried to explain about it. But he didn't seem like he was angry or anything. But yeah, you will run into people who will think that I'm being disrespectful. But
I can add a little bit more, at least like for me, the art I create kind of sometimes has a little bit of different meaning for how it is perceived overseas too. In my own country, I just did a newspaper interview while I was back in India last month, like Indian newspaper, but it's kind of, the meaning kind of changes a little bit, because here I'm showing my story as someone coming from my country to a different country. But when I speak about my art over there, it tells more about the story of like why it is okay, because a lot of times those questions come up, right? Like, is it okay to go overseas? Is it okay to go to Britain or to Australia, where racism is a little bit more a bigger problem? I mean, now it's getting better, but all those questions, I think it is good to talk about that while you're here, but also kind of show that in a different way. So I think it is accepted, but sometimes the premise kind of changes a little bit. At least I've seen that with my art. When I was talking about it, they kind of perceived it in a little different way, even though the underlying story was little same, because it is the story of basically everyone at this point in the world, but it still changes a little bit depending on where you are and where the actual base is while we talk about these issues.
Thank you. Thank you, Nimisha, and thank you, Reiko. I think we better move on. The first thing I want to do is talk tell you a little bit about the Artists Exchange. And we created it to provide a platform for artists to learn about each other's work, ideas, and processes. The program is also a forum for finding out about various opportunities for artists. So if you know of an opportunity, an exhibition or whatever, or have seen good exhibition you'd like to share with us, please do so.
Well, I have one that's coming up. I'm doing an installation with the Sansei granddaughters, and it's through the Asian American Women's Artists Association. It's called Jade Wave Rising, and it opens with a reception on April 27th, and it's going to be at Somarts in San Francisco.
Thank you. That's great. Can you write that in the chat so that we will have it?
Let's see.
Okay, while you're doing that, anyone else have anything to share with us?
Yeah, I have a couple of exhibitions going on. One is in Davis. It's North American women artists making some meaning today, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. It's a very prestigious exhibition with very well-known names, and I'm grateful that I'm sharing this space with them. And I also have a solo exhibition in San Ramon, which is very important for me. So I think I will really appreciate it. It's on till 31st March, and I can write about it again. And there's another one, Bay Area Figurative, going on in Livermore.
Well, congratulations, Salma, and congratulations, Reiko, on your shows. Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to share something before we move on. And that's an exhibition which is now open at the Abrams Claghorn Gallery in Albany. And it is called Hair. And it's curated by Farnaz Zapatian. I probably completely mangled that. And it features all Iranian women artists. And a lot of the issues are about a lot of the work is about issues surrounding their bodies and surrounding being an artist in Iran. Okay, anyone else?
Sure. I'll talk about what's happening at Gallery Route 1.
All right.
Okay, so we have a really wonderful juried exhibition. It's our annual juried show that's coming to a close this Saturday. So if you'd like to see it, this is your last chance. Come out to Point Reyes before it starts raining again. And take a look at that. And then we have a week to install the shows that are coming up next. And that's the show that Nimisha will be included in. We will also be showing wooden sculptures and other things by Bruce Mitchell and photographs by Charles Anselmo. And our opening reception will be held from 3 to 5 p.m. on Saturday, the 25th. And then we are looking for new artist members to join the gallery. And our deadline for this quarter is coming up the end of this month, March 31st. So I will put a link in the chat for that. And I would like to also invite anyone who can to donate to our Artist Exchange program. And when you get to the donation page, you can look for our Artist Exchange program and select that especially. That would be awesome. So I'm going to just put those things in the chat for everyone.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Shelley.
One last thing, if you would like to be added to the Gallery Route 1 email list, please put your email address in the chat.
And that's a great segue into the next portion, where we would love to hear from you if you're interested in presenting an artist that you know, or appearing on the program yourself. Please send an email to me at PamelaBlottner@gmail.com. And also, let's see, next month, we will have 2 new artists, of course, and some of you will know them as well. A printmaker and installation artist, Elizabeth Addison, and ceramic mixed media sculptor, Vicki Gunther. Should be a great show. Shelley, anything else?
Yeah, I'm just putting your email address in the chat.
Okay. Okay.
Oops, I spelled it wrong. Okay,
All right. All right.
all right. Well, if there's nothing else that anyone would like to add or say at this point, I'm just gonna pause for a moment in case something must be said. All right.
Please do say it.
So like Pamela said, if you're interested in presenting as an artist at a future artist exchange event, please send an email to Pamela. Her email address is in the chat, PamelaBlottner@gmail.com. And if you were moved by today's presentation and want to support the work that Geller Route 1 does to help people experience the world in new ways, then click on the donate link in the chat and give us a donation. Any amount would be wonderful. And we thank our artists, Reiko Fujii and Nimisha Doongarwal, and Pamela Blottner for being amazing, and all of you for coming to support this program and sharing this experience with us. And we hope to see you next month on April 19th.
Thank you, amazing Shelley Rugg.
Thank you, Pamela.
Thank
And
you.
thank you, audience.
Thank you for
Thanks,
coming.
everyone.
All
Thank
my
you.
friends, thank you for coming.
Bye. Have a good night, everyone. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.